I always feel after that video plays, I should be dancing. Great music behind it. Hey, welcome. My name is Brannen. I get the privilege of being one of the pastors here on staff. We're grateful that you're here today. We are in week 2 of our series, Change the World. And here's where we were at last week. If you bear the name Christian, like if Christ is your Savior, you've come to terms and come to believe that, you and I have been called to change the world. Jesus followers are world changers. We don't get out of that. And we said there's a tension in us last week. And here's the tension. We have a superhero mentality when it comes to changing the world. We believe to change the world, I need some kind of supernatural gifting or ability. Like, hey, do I need to be an overseas missionary? Don't feel called to that. Can't change the world. I can't preach. I can't play like these musicians. Like, how in the world am I supposed to change the world? On top of that, many of us just feel like we're just trying to manage life. We find ourselves in a really demanding, busy season, and we're like, if I could just manage my life, that's great. I don't know about changing the world. And yet, again, if you call yourself a Christian, we have this calling to change the world. And what we wanted to do last week is make it really ordinary for you. Because again, it's not something that only super Christians can do, change the world. It's not just for the Billy Grahams. It's actually for me and you, ordinary Christians. How do we change the world? And one of the ways that we saw in the life of Jesus is the way he performed ministry. It's almost like the dinner table or sharing a meal with others was one of the primary ways in which he spread the kingdom of God and connected with people. So the sharing intentionally of meals changes lives and others. It's been said, if you read the Gospel of Luke, one of the 4 accounts of Jesus' life, Jesus was either going to a meal, at a meal, or just leaving a meal. Like you just see this pattern and rhythm in his life of sharing meals with others. But we live in a fast food culture. And here's the fast food culture. If you're hungry, hurry up and go through the drive-thru, pick it up, scarf it down, and then you move on to the next thing. We've kind of lost the art of sitting around a table connecting with people. And yet, again, it's a very ordinary way for us to change the world, the table. So if you and I want to change the world, we've got to express some biblical hospitality, some intentional meal sharing. I think about some of my deepest friendships and where some of the conversations of greatest depth happen. And it was around a table. I think about some of the best laughs I've shared with others. It happened around a table. There's something about the table. Maybe that's why Jesus was always having a meal with others, whether it's the religious elite or sinners and tax collectors. So we said, hey, share meals with others. So here's what I want to do today. I want to tell you a story as we kind of prime the pump for the text. It's 2003, and I am a senior at the University of South Florida. Go Bulls. Okay, nobody. It's fine. I'm used to it. For all of us that didn't get into UF and FSU, we had to go to USF. And so we went to USF. And so 2003, I was studying, and the goal that year was to get 2 degrees. The first degree was an interdisciplinary science degree, and then to get a business degree. So to basically double major, finish off my senior year, and here's the scary part, then apply to medical school. Scary part. I mean, thinking of me as a doctor, big deal, kind of scary. Well, in my senior year, as I'm prepping for all of this, I really sensed that the Lord was doing a great work inside of me. Matter of fact, I look at 2003 as a year in which the Lord matured me more than he had ever matured me. And still to this day, that year was the most maturing year of my life. And I don't know if it was just timing, if it was the Lord, he just brought it all together. And my hunger and desire for him grew greatly. And not just that, but whenever you grow in desire and hunger for the Lord, there's also a desire and hunger for others to know the Lord too. So if you taste and see that something is good, you want to proclaim how good it is to others. And so what happened that year in 2003, a couple ministry opportunities landed on my lap. I wasn't looking for them, they just landed on my lap. The first is I was asked to lead a college Bible study. Now, by every measurable standard, I was not equipped to lead a Bible study. I didn't know a whole lot about the Bible. I'd grown up in the church, but I had never studied it well, read it on my own well, and then I'm asked to lead a Bible study. So the first week we have about 5 students that come, other college students. Within a month, there's 40 college students coming and listening to me teach the Bible. I still look back at that time today and go, Lord, you clearly can use all things. Because if you could have used those Bible studies and my messages back then, you can use all things. So I had that. And then I showed up to a church planning meeting. So I began to date this girl named Heather, who I ultimately would marry. And Heather was a part of this brand new church that was starting. And so one night she's like, join me. And so I joined her, and I'm meeting there. And after the meeting, the pastor comes up to me and goes, oh, you're a senior in college. Would you consider working for free? I'm a poor college student, and you consider everything, even if it's free. So I'm like, yeah, I would consider it. He's like, what if you were a free intern for us? And I'm like, wow, I mean, that is actually interesting. It does fascinate me a little bit, sure. And so I end up becoming an intern at this church. Later on, he realized I need a little bit of money. So he's like, if you can raise money, your own salary, then you can be a part of this church plan. We will pay you. It won't just be for free. So I ended up raising, you ready for this? Drum roll, $11,000. So I was making $11,000 a year in 2004 now. I finished off my degree. Things are getting really serious between me and Heather. She realized what a great catch I was, and she wanted to put a ring on it. And so she was very clearly driving me to marriage. I'm just kidding. I wanted to marry this girl. And so I ended up proposing to her in August of 2004. So we're getting serious. I'm now graduated as an undergrad, and now I'm heading into Bible school because I kind of feel like the Lord's calling me no longer to be a doctor, but to be a pastor. By the way, guys, this is how it worked out. When I first met Heather, I was on track to be a medical doctor, make great money, and then I switched it on her as we were dating, just a doctor of the soul that does not make nearly as much money. So if you're just dating, that's a good way to get a girl. Overpromise, underdeliver when it comes to your career. I had these thoughts, though, in this intermediate time as I was transitioning from medical studies to Bible studies. I go, Lord, I feel like I've wasted 3 years of my life. Why would I take all of these biology classes, physics? Like, Lord, what in the world does physics have to do with being a pastor? What in the world does chemistry have to do? Organic chemistry, like, why would I take all of these classes and then you just simply call me to be a pastor? It feels like I've wasted 3 years. God, could you not have told me 3 years ago, this is my calling in life, I should be doing this? Well, what I didn't know is he was setting up and weaving together something really beautiful. So it's 2004, we're now engaged, and I'm like, I actually got to make real money. $11,000 a year as an intern at a church does not work if you're going to get married. And unless you want to live with your in-laws forever, that doesn't work. And so we actually decided I needed to become a substitute teacher. That would provide flexibility and hopefully enough income that I could study over the summers, at night, but I'm not committed. So if I have a really busy week, I don't have to go in. I could just focus on my studies. So we end up going to Lake Gibson High School because back in 2004, if you want to be a substitute teacher, you actually had to have a principal sign off on your application. So we went up there. I'd never met the principal there. His name was Ralph Gilchrist. And Ralph is filling out our paperwork for us to submit our application. And Ralph goes, hey, I see that you have a degree. I go, yeah. He goes, let me just ask you, would you be interested in a full-time teaching position? And I'm like, listen, I just went through 3 years of like all these classes, heading in a direction I'm not taking. The Lord's calling me to be a Bible teacher, to be a pastor. He goes, listen, we'll make it really flexible for you. We'll give you 2 planning periods every single day. And then if you need a personal day, we can be flexible. You can take a personal day, focus on your studies. I really need a teacher. And I'm like, well, what subject would it be? He goes, we need a science teacher. Do you think you could pass a science test? And I'm like, listen, I spent the last 3 years studying that stuff. Like, bring it on. So a couple weeks later, I took a biology subject area exam. By God's grace, I passed it, and I became a teacher. Now, Heather and I, again, we're just learning how adulthood worked. We ended up getting married. We needed that job. You ready for this? I made $29,000 a year as a full-time teacher. I felt like back then that was like $1 million. Like, we were like big spenders. I'm like, babe, you want to go get champagne at the bar? And you want to go on big fancy meals? Because we thought $29,000 was the world, but we were able to buy like a little tiny house. We were able to pay for grad school. We were able to like prepare ourselves for the rest of our life by me being a science teacher. God was weaving together our lives, and what felt like wasted time, I've learned something about God. He uses everything and wastes nothing. I want to take you to the book of Acts. That's where we're going to read today, the book of Acts. And there's a doctrine that I want to point us to today when it comes to changing the world, and that is the doctrine of providence. So we're going to read Acts chapter 17, verse 22. And let me set up some context so you understand what we're about to read. Paul had met Jesus, and Jesus had radically changed the life of Paul. He went from being a persecutor of the church to actually having this great calling of spreading the good news of Jesus to Gentiles, non-Jews. And so literally he's going throughout the Roman Empire, and he is spreading the gospel in all these really important cities. He ends up at this point in time on his missionary journeys in Athens. Critical city. If you're gonna reach the world with the gospel, you wanna reach Athens. Why? Well, Athens was the epicenter of the debaters, philosophers, and intellects of the day. This is where all the great minds kind of convened, and there they would debate law, morality, religion. And Paul arrives in Athens, and then he's going around in Athens, and he's teaching at the synagogues. He's telling the Jews, hey, listen, good news, the Messiah has come. He's even going into the marketplaces, and he is telling them about the good news of Jesus. Now, the Greeks of that day, they were intrigued, the Greek philosophers. They're like, wait. So you're telling us that a God stepped out of heaven and he lived here for 33 years and then he died, but then he's alive again? So they were really intrigued, and they invited him into the most important place possible for debates, the Areopagus. The Areopagus, this is, again, where all of law was decided. The great philosophers, the great lawyers of that day, the intellects, they would gather on this hill and they would debate for hours and hours and hours. And they go, we want you to come speak to us there. This is the message he gives in the intellectual epicenter of the world on this hill. You ready for this? So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. He gets up on this hill. He's with the intellects, the debaters, the philosophers of the age. And what he does is he compares and contrasts their understanding of God and religion and what the Christian faith presents as God and religion. The first thing that he does is he builds a bridge. He goes, okay, I can see you guys are very, very religious. You have some awareness of spirituality, of a supernatural being. I walked past an altar and it said, to the unknown God. I can see you guys are very religious. And then what he does is he launches into correcting their misunderstanding of who God is. The first thing he says is, there is one God. Now, in the Greek understanding of gods, they were polytheistic, meaning they believed there were many, many gods, and each god had his own or her own domain. So when it came to the creation of the world, the Greeks actually believed at this time period that the world was created by lots of different gods. There was one god that created the animals. Then he recruited his brother, and they created humans. And then there was another god that created the mountains and rivers and valleys. They had all of these gods in their polytheistic culture. And he goes, no. There's not many gods with unique domains. There is one true God. So that's the first point of contention that he has in their understanding. There's not many gods, there's one God. Then he talks about the omnipresence of God. What is the omnipresence? Well, they believe that they could fashion the gods with gold or silver or stone, that he would live in this temple that they built. They actually had this understanding that Mount Olympus, which was the highest mountain in all of mainland Greece, that's where the gods lived. They lived there. They had this like physical place that was bound. And of course, Paul goes, wait, if he created it all, he's not bound by any of it. He is everywhere. God doesn't just live in temples. You can't constrain God to just a gold image or a silver image. You can't constrain it. He's omnipresent. He's everywhere. And then the aseity of God he also refers to. This is one of the big differences. See, the Greeks, their gods were very, very needy. They were looking for love. They had conflict that had to be resolved between them. There was major issues. They were needy gods. But then Paul goes, the God of the Christian faith is not needy at all. God does not need us in any way. So God didn't create the world because he had some kind of void. He's like, I got to fill this void, so I'm going to create. No, God created out of his joy, the overflow of his being going, I'm going to create just out of joy, not out of need. So he's just presenting the differences. The main difference that we're going to really focus in on is the providence of God. So the providence of God is much different than what the Greeks thought. The Greeks thought that you have all these gods, but they're really distant relationally. I mean, they don't really care about the fine details of our lives. I mean, they're worried about their unique domain. They're worried about finding love, resolving conflict. They have their own issues and set of problems. And often when you would see a person of this day and this culture pray, here's what would happen. They would pray to the God and they would be like, hey, remember I've done all these good things for you? I've done this and this. They would remind the God of what they've done. And then they would offer a sacrifice so the God wouldn't be mad at them. But Paul says something that would have completely destroyed their thoughts about the providence of God or the details of their life. He says this, verse 26, this is really important. He says, and he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. Let me unpack that. He says, God orchestrated the flourishing and thriving of humanity, and it all started with one man. And God ordained and appointed that from this one man, all nations would exist. And he was in the fine details. There are allotted periods, so every person from Adam all the way to these people in Athens, all the way to us, he's determined where they would live and when they would live. their allotted periods, the boundaries of their dwelling place. And this would have been a radical view for them. Because again, their gods were uninvolved in the minutia or details of life. But here he goes, wait, every fine detail of your life, God was in. Where you live, God's there. What time period in which you and I breathe and take in air, our parents, who those parents are of our parents, who their parents, every fine detail, God is in it. So let me just define the providence of God so we're all on the same page. It is the orchestration and care of God in every detail of life, where he uses everything and wastes nothing for his glory. The orchestration and care of God, that every fine detail of our life has not gone beyond his plan and his notice. Let me say it another way. He orchestrates what happens, when it happens, how it happens, why it happens, what happens before it happens, and what happens after it happens. The fine details of life, God is in that. And again, this would have been radical for the Greeks that had this unique view of all the gods that were disinterested in the details of their life. Now, we too struggle to see the providence of God. And here's why in the modern West, you and I struggle to see God in all the details of life. It's because of this. We fail to really believe in the supernatural and spiritual. We are, because of the advancements in science, we only look at the physical. And so for many of us, if we see something that happens that seems like a coincidence, we chalk it up to luck, to randomness. There was a study that found that 68% of Americans, so more than 2/3, believe in one kind of luck or another. You've probably said, you're so lucky. You've probably blown out candles on a birthday cake, making a wish. If you've ever seen a shooting star and you hurry up and make a wish, that is all telling of how we see the fine details of life. Often we believe it's random, it's lucky, it's just a coincidence, and yet Paul goes, no. Friends, every detail of life has been orchestrated by God. He is in the fine details. There is nothing outside of his rule and reign. He is overseeing everything, and guess what? He wastes nothing, and he uses everything. Wayne Grudem says it much better than I do in his systematic theology book. This is what he says. He says, all things come to pass by God's wise providence. This means that we should adopt a much more personal understanding of the universe and the events in it. The universe is not governed by impersonal fate or luck, but by a personal God. Nothing just happens. We should see God's hand in events throughout the day, causing all things to work together for good for those who love him. A deepening appreciation for the doctrine of providence will not make us more superstitious. It will make us trust in God more and obey him more fully. So if you are a Christian, you bear the name of Jesus, we see God in every detail of life. There is no luck, randomness, coincidence. It's all been ordained by him. And you're like, all right, I thought we were talking about changing the world today. So could you please explain this to me, how the providence of God and changing the world matters? Well, here's the thing. It's an overwhelming thought, but in eternity past, as God was laying out redemptive plans, and I don't exactly know how all this worked, but because we sit here in August of 2024, God has worked out every single detail for you to be here right now. How about this? God has worked out the fine details that you would live where you live for a reason. Often we think, oh, I lived there because that's what I could afford when I was going to buy a house. This is where the interest rates were. This is what my realtor found. This is why I'm here. I inherited this. The reason why you and I live in the home, apartment, or dorm in which we live in is because of the providence of God. God has placed us there. And here's what's really unique. The mission of God fuels the providence of God. And what I mean by that, his mission to save, redeem, and reconcile the lost creation fuels his orchestration and care of every detail in our life. Meaning, God placed you there so that the glory of God would advance, that more people would worship Jesus in your neighborhood, in your dorm room, in your apartment complex. Why? Because God orchestrates and brings together everything. You live where you live for a reason, for a purpose, and that is to spread the gospel. How about this? We have these giftings and abilities that often lead to careers. Who gave you that gifting and ability? Well, the Lord in eternity past, when he was thinking you up, he wired you in such a way that you would be good at things, certain things. And ultimately that you would have this job, and this job would lead to the spreading of the good news of Jesus. And actually, he would bring other people who have a very similar gifting. So, if you're a teacher, other teachers, he brings you all together and he goes, I want to spread my glory in this school, and I'm going to do it because of this person. In the workplace, in construction, whatever you do, God has wired you like he's wired you for a purpose, and that is for his glory and the spreading of the gospel. The things that you're into, the hobbies that you have. Why are you interested in certain things? My wife and I are really getting into pickleball. I would challenge you right now into a game of pickleball, and I will win. That's how serious I am about pickleball right now. But I love playing pickleball. And apparently there's a lot of other people that love playing pickleball because the courts are always full. But to think that the Lord gave me a certain interest, and not for the sake of the interest, but for the sake of his kingdom. Maybe you like to do triathlons or read and you're part of a book club, or you're part of a sports team or whatever that looks like. God has given you this interest and this hobby for a reason. And that is to spread the glory of God through the spreading of the gospel. Nothing is by chance. Where you live, where you work, where you play, it is all because of God. And Paul's saying, hey, since day one, since the first man all the way through now, we all have our boundaries because of him. We all have the time in which we're sucking in air on this earth because of him. He's orchestrated it all. I want to take you back to 2015. So I was a teacher, 2004, 2007. God opened up the door for us to move away for about 8 years. And then in 2015, we felt a strong stirring to come back home, Lakeland, to start a church, Redemption Church. And so we moved back, and some of the really unexpected things that happened just showed the providence of God. There were some friendships that we had long left, and we had no idea that God was going to resurface these. And some of the relationships that I had developed with some students would begin to come to fruition in 2015. There's one guy, Kyle Kloss. He was one of my students. He ran cross country. God brought us here. And then when we were here, he reconnected us. And in 2021, Kyle was baptized right here at Redemption Church. I'm just watching like, God, you use everything and you waste nothing. How awesome is that? Another student that I had during my 3 years of teaching was Wade Carino. Wade Carino was smarter than I even back then. He's still much smarter than I. I contacted him in 2015, said, hey, we moved back. We're going to start a church. He's like, I just got married. And we're looking for a church right now. We're in. Wade and his family were a part of our core team. They've been here since the very beginning. Now Wade is one of our elders at our church that helps shepherd and lead our congregation. The providence of God. When we moved back, I went to this thing. It was called First Friday. I had never heard of it. It was 2015. It was the first time we went to a First Friday in downtown Lakeland. And I'm walking and I hear this lady go, Brannen, Brannen. And I look over and it's this lady named Amy. And she's with another teacher that I had taught with. They had both worked at Lake Gibson. So I walk over, I'm like, hey, how you guys doing? It's so great to see you. I thought you moved. Why are you back? I'm like, the Lord was like, go back and start a church. I mean, we just feel it deep in our spirit. He is leading us and guiding us. And she goes, I got to tell you, this has got to be God. I've got a son, and he is a senior right now in college, and he thinks the Lord is calling him into ministry. I'm like, what's your son's name? And they're like, Austin. And I'm like, does he like to work for free? She said, yeah. And I'm like, I got a job for him. I end up having pizza with Austin, one of our pastors here on staff. Palace Pizza, 2015, August. And we sat over a table. He's like, I think God's calling me into ministry. I said, beautiful. Because I got a free job for you. He's like, free? I'm like, free. Meaning, you're free to us. And so he ends up becoming an intern. 4 years ago, we ordained him as one of our pastors, and now he is our formation pastor here. And many of you know and love Austin. God weaving together everything, how good are you? See, I thought those 3 years were wasted. God, I thought you had me on this path, and then you went ahead and you jerked the wheel to something else. He goes, no, I wasted nothing, and I used everything for my glory. And so, friends, here's what you have to hear today. You live where you live because God has placed you there. You work where you work because God has placed you there. We think the mission field is overseas. The mission field is out your front door. The mission field is the moment you walk into work. The mission field is the moment you walk onto that field with a bunch of other kids, players. Friends, you have been called to change your world, and God has providentially put you in the places that he has put you in for a reason. So how do we do this? I think we reclaim this, the table. This week you'll have 21 meals, and we had a challenge last week. If changing the world could be as simple as sharing a meal, what if you just had one meal out of those 21, just one meal that you shared with a coworker, a neighbor, you invited somebody over, maybe you met them for coffee, maybe it's a dorm mate, I don't know what it looks like, but just one meal. We've been called to change the world, friends. That's what it looks like. Simple, ordinary. See, the world has a certain picture of us, right? Bigots, hateful. But what if we were people that were radically hospitable, warm, gracious, inviting? How could that change the world? I want to end with this. In eternity past, God said, you and I would be in this room right now. Isn't that an overwhelming thought to think about? Like, you and I would be breathing in air in this room right now. God has orchestrated every fine detail of your life to lead you here today and to me here today. Every detail has been worked out, orchestrated. His care for the minutia of life can be seen right now. And here's the thing. God right now is drawing some of you. I love how Paul begins to conclude the message. He goes, God's not far off. He's not far off. How do we know that God is not far off? Because the Father sent the Son down to this earth. He was born of a virgin. He lived 30 years in just relative obscurity, being a simple carpenter, but obeying the Father in every way. And then he did 3 years of public ministry. He said, I'm the one that you've been waiting for. I'm the Messiah. And he was murdered on a cross by Romans and Jews because of his claim to be the one, the Messiah, the one that would save us and redeem us from our sins. And then for 3 days, he lay there dead. But on the third day, he rose from the dead. By the providence of God, you are hearing that message today. Don't turn away from it. God is not far off. He has come to save us. And so if you're here right now and you've never trusted in Jesus, God orchestrated that this would be the message that you would hear today. He had you here for a reason. Repent. Come back to him. Paul says that he will one day, Jesus, come back and judge in righteousness. Nobody will look at God on the day of judgment and go, you were unfair. He's like, no, my providence was woven throughout your life and you got to hear the good news. If you've never trusted Jesus, today trust him. Or maybe you've been walking away from him. You've just been a nominal Christian. Maybe today you're like, I've got to stop being just a nominal Christian. I need to actually step it up and actually follow Jesus. This is the butt kick that I needed. Hearing about your providence, weaving together my life and the details, this is what I needed. Whatever the Lord is stirring you to do, today respond in obedience. Maybe it's even baptism. We're going to be baptized in here in a few weeks. If you've never been baptized since becoming a Christian, be baptized. Declare your faith to all through this beautiful act. Whatever the Lord's stirring you to do, I'm going to encourage you to obey that.